I had always believed marriage was built on trust. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that lives in everyday moments. Shared meals, tired smiles, half-finished conversations at the end of long days. That night, we were invited to dinner by my husband's colleagues. A high-end Japanese restaurant downtown. Elegant, minimalist. The kind of place where people spoke softly and waited to be impressed. My husband Mark seemed unusually excited. "They serve authentic food," he said casually while fixing his tie. "Not the westernized stuff," I smiled. "Sounds nice." What he didn't know, what he never bothered to ask in 7 years of marriage, was that I spoke Japanese fluently. Not casually, not enough to order sushi fluently. Because before Mark, before this life, I had lived in Tokyo for 4 years. Studied, worked, learned the language the hard way, through loneliness, mistakes, and persistence. But Mark never asked, and I never told him. At the restaurant, his co-workers greeted us warmly. Laughter, handshakes, polite bows. Everything seemed normal. Harmless. We were seated at a long table. I sat beside Mark. Across from us were 2 men and a woman, his team leads. They all ordered drinks. I chose water. That's when Mark leaned toward them and spoke in Japanese. At first it was harmless. Small talk, compliments about the food, jokes about work. Then his tone shifted. I noticed it immediately. The subtle edge, the confidence. The way people speak when they believe they're invisible. One of the men laughed and said something back in Japanese. Mark responded, smiling, and that's when I heard it. "She doesn't understand anyway," he said in Japanese, nodding toward me. I can finally speak freely. My fingers tightened around my glass. The woman across from us asked, "Then why did you marry her?" Mark chuckled. "Convenience," he replied. "She's loyal. Predictable, not easy to manage." My heart skipped. Another man added, "But she's not exactly impressive." Mark shrugged. "She tries. But honestly, if it weren't for appearances, I'd already be gone." They laughed. I didn't move. I didn't react. Inside, something cracked open. I had shared my life with this man, my body, my time, my future, and here he was, dissecting me like an inconvenience, right beside me. The woman asked, "So why keep her around?" Mark sipped his drink. "Because she thinks I'm her whole world," he said. "And people like that don't ask questions." Silence rang in my ears. I felt heat rise to my face, but not from embarrassment, from clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. My husband didn't just underestimate me. He didn't see me at all. The conversation continued. Complaints, jokes, casual cruelty, wrapped in a language he believed was safe. "She gained weight? She's boring. She's too emotional." Every word landed like a knife. And I smiled, I nodded, I played the role perfectly. Because Mark still didn't know, but I did. And the woman across the table finally said something that made my pulse race. "So what's your plan?" Mark leaned back confidently. "I'm already preparing my exit," he said. "She'll never see it coming." That was when I set my glass down. Carefully, quietly. I turned my head and looked directly at him. And in flawless Japanese, I said, "Would you like to explain what part of my life you're planning to steal first?" The table froze. Mark's face drained of color. And in that moment, everything changed. The restaurant was elegant in that quiet, expensive way. Low lights, soft music. The kind of place where people spoke carefully because every sentence felt like it had a price tag. I sat across from my husband, smiling politely, nodding at the right moments, playing the role I had perfected over years. The obedient wife, the silent wife, the wife who wouldn't understand anyway. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to learn, was that my grandmother had raised me speaking Japanese before English. That the language he used so freely was stitched into my childhood, my memories, my bones. When his phone buzzed, he glanced at it and smirked. "She's late," he said in English, referring to his colleague Yumi. Typical. Then without even looking at me, he switched languages. Japanese.casual. Confident, cruel. 正直に言うと、彼女はここに作ってるだけで恥ずかしい. Honestly, just having her sit here is embarrassing. My fingers tightened around my glass. He continued, unaware that every word was landing like a blade. 英語も中途半端だし、会話もつまらない。家では中華で都合がいいけど、外では見せられない。Her English is mediocre. She's boring to talk to. At home she's quiet and convenient, but in public, I can't show her off. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, but I didn't move. I didn't react. I stayed perfectly still. Across the table, he laughed softly, typing a reply, and added, "Lihon suru liyu ga dekitara, sugu kiru tsumori da." Once I have a good reason for divorce, I'll cut her off immediately. My heart didn't break, it hardened. Yumi arrived moments later, greeting him in Japanese, barely acknowledging me. I smiled politely at her too. That smile, so practiced, so calm, was the same one I would later use in court. They spoke freely now, both of them. About work, about plans. About me, like I wasn't there. Like I was furniture. "Penyu wa nani mo kizukanai yo ne?" Yumi asked, glancing at me. "She doesn't notice anything, right?" He chuckled. "Kiduku wake nai. Ayu taipu da yo." "No way. She's that type. Quiet, disposable, replaceable." I took a slow sip of water, memorizing every syllable, every insult, every assumption. This wasn't just disrespect. This was strategy. He was planning his exit, financially, socially, emotionally, while keeping me exactly where I was, useful, unaware, and silent. Except I wasn't unaware, and I wasn't silent. I was listening. When the waiter asked if everything was okay, my husband answered for me. "She's fine," he said. I nodded. Yes, I was fine, because now I knew. And knowing was dangerous. By the time dessert arrived, I had already made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't reveal that I understood a single word. I would let him keep talking. Let him underestimate me. Let him plan. Because men like him only lose when they think they've already won. As we stood to leave, he placed a hand on my back. Possessive, performative. "Did you enjoy dinner?" he asked in English. I looked up at him and smiled warmly. "Very much," I said. In Japanese, inside my head, I added, "This was the last night you spoke freely." Outside, the city lights glittered. Inside me, something had shifted forever, and this time I would not stay quiet. The restaurant was elegant, filled with soft lighting and polite laughter. To anyone watching, it looked like a perfect evening. Successful businessmen, refined conversations, expensive wine. To them, I was just the quiet wife sitting beside her husband, smiling politely, nodding when expected. What they didn't know was that every single word my husband said in Japanese was cutting into me like glass. I lowered my eyes to my plate, pretending to focus on my food, while my heart pounded violently in my chest. "Honestly," my husband said in Japanese, chuckling softly, "she wouldn't understand any of this anyway." "She's just decorative," the men laughed. Another voice replied, "But she's loyal, right?" "Obedient?" He smirked. "Too obedient." "That's the problem. She believes everything I tell her." My fingers tightened around my fork. Decorative obedient. Clueless. Years of marriage. Reduced to a joke over dinner. I felt heat rise to my face, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. If I reacted now, I would lose something far more valuable than my dignity. I would lose control. One of his colleagues leaned closer. "So the accounts? She doesn't know?" My husband took a sip of wine. "Of course not. All the overseas transfers are under my name. If anything ever happens, she gets what I allow her to get." They laughed again, this time louder. I stared straight ahead, my vision blurring. Not from tears, but from rage so intense it felt like electricity under my skin. They continued speaking freely, carelessly. He talked about hiding assets, about how marrying me had been convenient, about how I was replaceable. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "If I ever needed to leave," he said casually, "I'd be gone before she even realized what happened. She wouldn't survive on her own." That's when I realized something crucial. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just arrogance. This was a man who had already planned his escape. I slowly lifted my glass, taking a sip of water to steady my shaking hands. Outwardly calm. Inwardly, a war had begun. I replayed every suspicious moment from the past years. The late-night calls, the unexplained trips, the accounts he insisted on handling himself. It all made sense now. He wasn't just underestimating me. He was actively betraying me. The dinner continued, and I stayed silent. I laughed when expected. I smiled when someone looked at me. I played the role perfectly, because now silence was my weapon. As we stood to leave, one of his colleagues bowed politely to me. "Your wife is very quiet," he said in Japanese. "Very peaceful." My husband smiled proudly. "Yes, she trusts me completely." I met his eyes, and for the first time something flickered there. Uncertainty. Maybe it was the way I smiled. Maybe it was the calm in my gaze, but he felt it. On the drive home, he talked casually about business, about how successful the dinner had been. I listened, nodding, letting him believe the illusion was intact. Inside, I was already planning. That night, after he fell asleep, I quietly got out of bed. I opened my laptop, and I began. I searched for every account, every investment, every legal document he thought I didn't understand. Because here was the truth he didn't know. I didn't just speak Japanese. I studied international finance in Japan. I understood contracts, I understood loopholes, and I understood exactly how dangerous his words had been. By sunrise, I wasn't crying, I was calculating. Because when a man tells the world, confidently, that his wife is powerless, he never sees her coming. And my husband had no idea that the woman he mocked at dinner was about to dismantle his entire world, piece by piece. The restaurant was quiet in that deceptive way expensive places often are. Soft music, low laughter, the clink of glasses pretending everything is normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I sat there smiling, nodding, playing the obedient wife. Inside, I was burning. Kenji's friends had leaned closer, their voices dropping into conspiratorial tones, and that's when he forgot something crucial. He forgot who I was. He forgot that I understood every single word. "He's lucky," one of them said in Japanese, glancing at me. "She looks devoted, obedient." "Foreign women usually are." Kenji laughed. "She's useful," he replied casually, slicing into his steak. "She pays half the bills, cooks, cleans, but don't worry. I'd never marry someone like her seriously. She's temporary. My fingers tightened around my fork, but my face didn't change. Years ago, my grandmother had taught me something important. Silence is power when your enemy doesn't know you're armed. Another friend smirked. "Does she know about the apartment in Osaka?" Kenji shook his head. "Of course not. She doesn't even know I'm moving money back home. Once everything's ready, I'll leave. Clean break." My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Money. Hidden accounts? Plans to disappear. He continued, lowering his voice even more. "She thinks I love her. But honestly, she's just convenient. A bridge until my real life is secure." I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. Instead, I smiled and took a sip of wine. Because in that moment, I realized something far more important than anger. I had proof, and he had no idea. I excused myself to the restroom, my legs trembling as I walked away. Inside the marble-lined bathroom, I locked myself into a stall and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. I replayed his words in my head, memorizing them. Useful, temporary. Moving money, leaving. I didn't cry, I recorded. My phone, safely tucked in my purse back at the table, had been recording since the moment the conversation turned. I'd started it instinctively, quietly, without looking. When I returned, Kenji smiled at me like nothing had happened. "Everything okay?" he asked in English. "Perfect," I replied sweetly. Dinner ended with laughter, handshakes, and polite goodbyes. His friends bowed slightly to me, still convinced I was clueless. I bowed back. That night, Kenji slept peacefully. I didn't. I sat in the living room, headphones on, listening again and again to the recording. Every word was clear, every insult, every plan. And suddenly, pieces of the past clicked into place. The unexplained bank transfers, the business trips, the pressure to put accounts in his name, the way he always dismissed my questions. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He was preparing to erase me. By morning, my shock had transformed into something colder. Precision, I contacted a lawyer, then a financial forensic specialist, then, quietly, a translator certified to authenticate the recording. Within days, the truth became undeniable. Kenji wasn't just cruel, he was committing fraud. Hidden accounts in Japan, funds siphoned from our joint finances, property purchased without disclosure, and documented intent to abandon the marriage once assets were secured. The man who thought I was useful had handed me the knife himself. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I watched. I listened, I documented. Every smile he gave me now felt grotesque. Every "I love you" sounded rehearsed. And the more I learned, the more dangerous his plan revealed itself to be. If he succeeded, I wouldn't just be heartbroken. I'd be broke, alone, and legally trapped. But he'd miscalculated one thing. He thought I didn't understand his language. He never considered that I understood his soul. The next step wasn't revenge, it was strategy. Because when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't be in a whisper, it would be in a courtroom. And he would never see it coming. That night I didn't confront him. That was the mistake he expected me to make. Instead, I smiled. I laughed at the right moments. I poured him tea. I kissed his cheek before bed and wished him good night, as if my heart hadn't shattered hours earlier in that restaurant. But inside me, something cold and sharp had awakened. The next morning, I moved like a ghost through our house, quiet, observant, deliberate. While he showered, I checked his phone. He had grown careless, confident. Men always do when they believe their wives are ignorant. There were messages in Japanese, long ones, intimate ones, not just about business, not just about money, about me, about how useful I was, about how long he planned to keep pretending, about the woman waiting for him back in Tokyo, with the child he called his real family. My hands trembled, but my face remained calm. I forwarded everything to myself: screenshots, voice notes, calendar invites, flight bookings, a second apartment lease. Then I erased my tracks. That afternoon, I made an appointment with a lawyer, one who specialized in international assets and marital fraud. When I spoke, I did so in perfect Japanese first. The lawyer's eyebrows lifted. "You understand everything?" he asked. "Yes," I replied softly. "And I want him to understand nothing until it's too late." We built the plan carefully. Over the next weeks, I played my role flawlessly. I encouraged his business trips. I asked about his work with admiration. I even learned the name of the other woman's child. He thought he was winning. Meanwhile, I transferred ownership of everything that was legally mine. I froze accounts he didn't know were tied to my name. I documented every lie, every omission, every betrayal. Then came the dinner invitation. His company was hosting a formal event for international partners. He begged me to come. "You're perfect for this," he said. "They love you." I smiled. "I'll be there." That night I wore red. Not the color of love, the color of warning. As the executives gathered, glasses clinking, laughter echoing, I watched him move through the room, confident, charming, untouchable, until the CEO stepped onto the stage. "Before we continue," the man said, "we'd like to acknowledge a concern brought to our attention regarding ethics, transparency, and personal conduct." My husband stiffened. The lights dimmed. The screen behind them turned on. Japanese text filled the wall. His words, his messages, translated. Out loud, gasps rippled through the room as the narrator read, "My wife is clueless. She doesn't even understand what I say about her. I'll divorce her once the assets are secure." The blood drained from his face. I stood and I spoke, in flawless Japanese. "You're right," I said calmly. "I understood everything." The room froze. I turned to the audience. He lied to his company. He lied to his partners. He committed marital fraud across 2 countries, and he assumed the woman beside him was too weak and too foreign to notice. I looked at him then. "But you underestimated one thing." I smiled. My silence. Security approached him. Executives whispered. Phones came out. His world collapsed in real time. As I walked out, heels echoing like punctuation marks, I knew one thing for certain. The trap had closed. And there was no escape left. The room was silent after I spoke. Not the comfortable kind of silence, the kind that suffocates. My husband stared at me as if I had just transformed into someone else entirely. His chopsticks slipped from his fingers and clattered against the plate. Across the table, his colleagues froze, eyes wide, backs stiff, breath held. Because they all understood what had just happened. The woman they had mocked, the wife they thought was ignorant, the foreign embarrassment, had understood every word. In perfect Japanese. You speak Japanese?" my husband finally stammered. I didn't answer right away. I took my napkin, dabbed my lips calmly, and looked around the table. Every single face avoided my eyes. "I've spoken it for 8 years, I said evenly. "I just didn't think my husband needed to know, until now." His face drained of color. "You said I was a burden," I continued, my voice steady. "That you regretted marrying me. That I was useful only for appearances. That you planned to leave me once your promotion was finalized." Gasps echoed softly around the table. One man cleared his throat, another shifted uncomfortably. My husband's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stood. "For months," I said, "I wondered why you were distant, why you stopped touching me, why you treated me like a stranger in my own home." I looked directly at him. "Now I know. You weren't just pulling away. You were planning your exit in another language." The restaurant manager approached cautiously. "Ma'am, would you like us to—" "Yes," I said gently. "Please bring the check. Separate. My husband jumped up. Wait, this isn't... It is, I interrupted. And you should sit down. You've embarrassed yourself enough. That sentence, spoken calmly, cut deeper than any scream. I paid my share, bowed politely to the staff, and turned to leave. But before I reached the door, I stopped. I understood everything, I said without turning back. And tomorrow, so will my lawyer. The fallout was immediate. The next morning, my husband woke up to frozen accounts. Not all, but enough to get his attention. By noon, his HR department called, apparently discussing marital manipulation and future divorces with subordinates violated several company ethics policies. By evening, he came home frantic. You planned this, he accused. No, I replied calmly. I listened. I showed him the recordings, the messages, the translated transcripts. You underestimated me, I said. In 2 languages, he begged. Apologized, cried. I watched without emotion. Love doesn't survive disrespect, I said, and humiliation doesn't deserve forgiveness. The divorce was swift, the evidence was overwhelming. And the irony? The language he used to belittle me became the language that ended him. Months later, I sat alone at a cafe, sipping tea, reading a novel, in Japanese. Free. I had lost a husband, but I had reclaimed myself, and this time I didn't need to translate my worth for anyone.